Now, Monsters, Inc. Conrad Black was once one of the most powerful men in the kingdom. As owner of the Daily Telegraph and lots of other papers, he was courted by the political class and flattered by the investors' tip sheets. Then he fell foul of the American justice system and charged with being seriously myopic when it came to figuring out what was his money and what was the company's. Lord Black of Cross Harbour, Knight of the Holy See, Privy Councillor and Officer of the Order of Canada, became prisoner 1833024. He didn't like it and he's pretty cross about it. I went to see him earlier, but first Peter Marshall tries to shine some light on him.
It was a calamitous fall compared inevitably to the demise of the fictitious Citizen Kane. Lord Conrad Black was a real newspaper baron whose crimes were ultimately covered in papers he'd once owned and defrauded.
He has been consistently accused by the courts and by others of being dishonest, and always his reply is, "I'm the victim." And this is no different now. Conrad Black has always played the victim card in his defence of his criminal behaviour.
Ennobled in the Lords, this was the zenith of Conrad Black's career and the beginning of the end.
I, Conrad Lord Black of Cross Harbour, do swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful.
The son of a wealthy Canadian industrialist, 20 years after buying his first paper in Quebec, Black had taken over the Daily Telegraph. He was also soon alleged to be looting his company on a grand scale.
What is so comical about Conrad Black is that when he was in London as the owner of the Telegraph, he was always saying what genius capitalism is. But when it was the capitalists, the shareholders in his own company, who said to him in 2001, "You're stealing the shareholders' money, you're defrauding Hollinger, the Telegraph Group," it was he that said that he's now the victim of capitalism, because he wanted to take as much money as he needed.
Well, he's the victim of the American prosecutors, isn't he?
Well, of course he's the victim of the prosecutors, because they prosecuted a fraudster.
5 years ago, Conrad Black was convicted in an American court of defrauding the company he'd led, Hollinger.
Lord Black, are you confident you'll be able to clear your name ultimately, Lord Black?
He was initially jailed for 6.5 years, but served less than half that after winning appeals against a number of the fraud counts. He still claims to be innocent of all crimes, but back home in Canada, the country he'd once renounced as being in decline, he remains a controversial figure. He currently has a 1-year residency visa and the opposition want him booted out. It's a far cry from the days when he and Barbara Emile, his second wife, had 2 private jets and homes in London's Kensington and Park Avenue, New York.
Barbara Emile for Conrad Black was an awakening and enlightenment, an apparition. I mean, she was for him a goddess because she combined beauty and intelligence and sassiness and everything else. The problem was she also had this insatiable extravagance. As she said, "My extravagance knows no bounds."
At one time, Conrad Black ran the 3rd biggest newspaper group in the world, but his biographer says he was a millionaire with a billionaire's living standard. Famously, in fancy dress, he was compared to Cardinal Richelieu, she to Marie Antoinette. Others say Conrad Black was less modest.
In the end, Conrad Black believes he's God and everyone must bow to him. I mean, his hero is Napoleon, except he doesn't figure in the same way as Napoleon. He's always defeated Conrad, whatever he does. The one thing you can't say about Conrad Black is that he's a physical coward, because in the end he always comes back, and comes back again and again and again to suppress his critics.
He's a fighter.
He's a fighter because that is the only way in which he's been able to make his money.
And Conrad Black, Lord Black, is indeed back, plugging his book, proclaiming he's been wrongly convicted and trying to rebuild a reputation. And that will take some fight.
Do you think prison made you a better person?
Hard for me to say, Jeremy. I'm always suspicious of people who claim to be better people. It certainly was a broadening experience, I can say that. And it was, in a way, a humbling one, so that's normally good for us. So I suppose I would say yes, but I don't want to give your viewers the impression that I'm trumpeting myself as an altogether made-over virtuous person.
Not at all. I mean, you deny all the charges against you, don't
They're
you?
rubbish, and anyone can see they're rubbish.
But you are a convicted fraudster.
No, I'm not. In the first place, under British and Canadian rules, none of this would stand up. We got rid of all the counts, and we had the prosecuting statute declared unconstitutional.
But when you read the remarks of the judges, for example, the judge in Delaware, that you are evasive and unreliable.
That was not a criminal case, and that was a completely, just a minute, that was a completely fallacious judgment that was, in fact, absolutely defied by the jurors.
It is the opinion of a judge.
Oh,
and you have been
please.
Convicted.
Will you stop this bourgeois priggishness? You're talking as if
What's bourgeois priggishness? You're a criminal.
No, I'm not a criminal. Do you think a British court would have behaved like this? Do you think a British court would wait a second, would throw 17 counts, racketeering, money laundering, all of this, have all of it thrown out, everything, the Supreme Court or equivalent in this country, denouncing the lower court judges as idiots, the infirmity of invented law, and then telling them...
You just misunderstood what was legal.
Everything I did was legal. I didn't misunderstand any of it. It was a smear job from A to Z. Because 99.5% of prosecutions in the U.S. are convicted. The whole system is a fraudulent, fascistic conveyor belt of the corrupt prison system. That's why. Let me tell you something. The 5% of the population of the world are Americans. 25% of the incarcerated people are, and 50% of the lawyers are. 99.5% conviction rate.
This sits very
6 to 12 times as many incarcerated people per capita as Britain, Canada, Australia, France, Germany, or Japan. How do you explain that?
I don't think I have to answer that
well,
question.
Give it a try.
Why?
Before you accuse me of being a criminal, give it a try.
You are a criminal. You're a convicted criminal.
No, you're a fool. You're just a gullible fool. You're a priggish, gullible British fool who takes seriously this ghastly American justice system that any sane English person knows is an outrage.
This sits very oddly, doesn't it, with your protestation that you're a Roman Catholic? I mean, don't you do penitence?
I do. I do, and I believe in the punishment of crime as well as the confession of wrongdoing.
Do you not think that a man who has been found guilty by due process of law ought to be slightly penitent?
If it is, in fact, due process. There was no due process of law in that. You see, Jeremy, your problem is you have no idea how that system operates. And as influential a journalist as you are, should know something about it.
You're the one who chose to locate his business there.
I did, yes.
And what, you were just foolish or what?
In fact, I'd say that's slightly overstating it, but I made a mistake. I underestimated the venality and corruption of the American legal system. I confess to that. I'm very penitent about it too.
What astonishes, or what will astonish, I suspect, our viewers, is that a man who's been through all of this should show no humility and no shame.
Of course not. I've been persecuted half to death. I don't have any shame. I am proud of what happened. I'm proud of having been in a U.S. federal prison and survived it as well as I did. I had no problems with anyone, not in the regime and not amongst the fellow residents. Let me tell you something. I am proud of having gone through the terribly difficult process of being falsely charged, falsely convicted, and ultimately almost completely vindicated without losing my mind, becoming irrational, ceasing to be a penitent and reasonable person, and actually being able to endure a discussion like this without getting up and smashing your face in, which is what most people would do if they'd been through what I have been.
Well, you go ahead and do.
No, I don't believe in violence.
Do you expect to be able to retain your seat in the House of Lords as well?
Well, why not? I'm not under...
Because you're a convicted criminal.
First of all, there is not a prohibition on a convicted criminal sitting in that house.
But you don't really believe that a man who's done time in prison should be able to help frame the laws of a country, do you?
Sure.
You do believe that?
Indeed. If he's if there's a question about his guilt in the first place, say it was a person convicted in North Korea or something. I mean, on that theory, Nelson Mandela couldn't sit. But if I were you, I'd be careful of being such a gullible rubber stamp to that crooked American system. And in the second place,
so you think a convicted paedophile, for example, should be able to sit in the House of Lords and make laws on child protection? You don't. Really
that is not what I said.
No.
If you ask it in those terms,
you want to judge.
If he was a legitimately convicted pedophile, I would say there were serious problems about him sitting in a legislative body.
The legal process is about determining whether people are justly convicted or acquitted, isn't it? But you put yourself above that, don't you?
No, I do not.
Well, you've just
I put myself in the camp of Henry David Thoreau, who said that in a society that routinely sends innocent people to prison, the place for innocent people is in prison. The idea that I would sit there in a public company and steal $285,000, that's what they're down to, and they don't even claim it's a theft. They don't even claim it's a fraud. They claim it's an improper reception of money that was voted by the directors and published as a fact. That is what you were waxing so sanctimonious about.
Does having a very extravagant wife make that sort of behaviour more likely?
Oh, God, I'm going to throw up. After 7 years, my first morning back in Britain, am I to be subjected to this? She wasn't extravagant. And she's a magnificent wife, and she visited me every week in prison, even when she had to come back from China to do it.
Why did you suddenly start spending so much money then?
I didn't start spending so much money. I was a well-to-do man. I spent in accord with my means, and my means went up.
So if I understand you correctly, you're a man traduced.
Absolutely. And if I may, and I mean, again, I've been a bit forceful with you. I want to disabuse any of your viewers the idea that I think I'm always right. I made some terrible mistakes, but not ethical mistakes. Not ethical mistakes, and certainly not acts of theft.